Okay, I am live. Well, today I thought I would talk about all the things that I usually try to talk about if I can figure anything out, which I'm not good at figuring things out today. Where is the link? See, I can't even find the link to get people to join the stream. This is a bad start. I think about weird stuff. I'm really just I'm hoping someone will come along and like someone will come along and tell me how to put the link in the chat so I can let people join if they want to join. The kind of stuff I think about is weird. When people use the word mid as a put down, it can be used as a put down of a thing or of a person. It's not immediately obvious why something being mid, which would, one would think that means average, like 50th percentile or what have you. It's not immediately obvious why that's a put down. I think the sense in which we do use it and experience it as a put down highlights something really critical about the nature of desire. Yeah, I'm theoretically live right now. What I mean by that is that there's always this kind of identity between oneself and whatever one has got in one's consciousness. Consciousness it's like if you're trying to find what it is beyond whatever is represented within it, whatever its states are, whatever its values are, as distinct from the field that consciousness is, one doesn't really find much. In fact, nothingness is almost like the precise technical description of what one finds. Kale, yes, it is I am the vegetable. Lance or Nathaniel, can you just tell me how to put the link in the chat? And this is so sad because I didn't learn anything from last time. But so, like, intentionality is somehow this nothingness, right? And so there's a way that consciousness is identified with its contents at the same time that, like, reflexively it can also ask what it itself is and thereby sort of stand distinct from its contents. There's this is a great question. Like, what you value, why do you value what you value? Is what's good because the gods love it, or do the gods love what's good because it's good? Or in Genesis 1 terms, God created something in his image and called it good. Now, was it good because it was in his image, or was it in his image because it was good? Something like this. But there's a question of always with desire and valuation, like, do we think that it's is beauty in the eye of the beholder, or is it somehow like in the object? If we're talking about, like, let's say God, the one, the ultimate reality, the answer to those two questions must necessarily be yes. There has to be like this for the one, or the ultimate reality, the one consciousness in which we live and move and have our being. The subjective and the objective sort of necessarily would seem to coincide there. And but like for us, like the way that valuation works, we do identify ourselves with what we value. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Phlebas. We do identify ourselves with what we value, but it's also the case that this is hard. I'm kind of losing my thought. Losing my train of thought. I was hoping Jason would be in here. I'm not good with distractions. Maybe I'll just try to back up and restart. To see something as desirable, to see someone as desirable, there is that sense where you're seeing your own identity in them. It's like one's own identity is all one has in terms of which to conceive the infinite, which is like what one really values. So what one values, it's like anything that we value, we desire it to the extent that it images the infinite, which is like that kind of ideal. What's that word I want? Not approximation, integration. It's like an ideal integration of differentiated parts, such that a limit is overcome through their integration. So everything that we see as desirable, we see as desirable to the extent that it images that. And when I say that what we see as desirable, we see ourselves in, or we see as an image of ourselves, the usage of the word self there is tricky because self is there being used without a complement. It's in the sense that everything that you experience is something that you could, in a sense, call self, as being part of your consciousness. It's the sense in which, if one was all that existed, one would never know it. And so it's simultaneously one's image of the self and God. There's that Calvin quote that all knowledge of God begins in knowledge of the self, and it's hard to say where one begins and the other, and ends, and so forth. There's something related to something else that I wrote there. But I was going to say, it completely left me. Enter your broadcast studio from the homepage. Tap the guest button at the bottom of your studio. Guests. This is bad. Tap invite a guest. Copy the link shown, or tap copy to clipboard and send it to your guest. And maybe they just want invite. Okay, here it is. Got it. Thank you. For some reason, when I saw invite, I thought it was necessarily like invite a specific person, but I wanted to invite all people, which I just now did. Yeah, really rocky start here. Anyone is welcome to come in and talk about anything, I suppose. Desire is a function of likeness rather than lack. Well, I guess the only way I know how to put it is the way that I began to put it, which is what we desire in everything. Desire or love, it's like the self-recognition function of the one. Oh, come in. Let's come in. And Lance, okay. And yeah, desire or love is like the self-recognition function of what you would call the one. And so what it desires is whatever is infinite, whatever overcomes a limit by being some ideal integration of differentiated parts. If you want an example, the TV that's behind me, it overcomes a limit of like, and normally stuff that's not where you are is not stuff that you can see. But it's overcoming this limit. How? It's an integration of differentiated parts. What parts? Well, it's got to do with like, tubes and pixels and stuff that I don't understand. But because it's all there in the right way, an integration that is easily lost or destroyed, then you get the overcoming of that limit of time and space and distance and things like that. That's an example. But really, what we always desire is sort of like the highest infinite that we can conceive, because really anything less than that wouldn't even be infinite. It would be some limit or rule that a thing is like defined on, and that's why we use mid as a put down. Incidentally, I think that's how I started, and so like if one is not what exceeds or excels the rule or transcends the rule, but is instead really merely ruled by the rule, like that's an issue. We don't take that as good. It's automatically to show or to illustrate that we're in the image of God. God is whom we desire as. It's like our true. Well, like they say, God is like a reflection of one's true self and also the intimate stranger. But there's always that sense where God, in being the sort of the true infinite, who's beyond all binaries, he's beyond the distinction between self and God. And so in that in that unitive sense, one sees in God a reflection of one's true self. Yeah, did I study philosophy, Sandy? No, which really shows. And today, I had energy this morning before I had to do a whole bunch of stuff, and now I'm already crashing.
Hey, Cal.
Yeah.
Do you ever? I know I've tried to challenge you on this in the past, unsuccessfully, and I know others have, or I think others have. And so I wonder if you ever, in your own internal conversations, are able to present any kind of challenge to the idea that what we're always desiring is the highest good, and that you're maybe secretly hoping that somebody comes up with it one day, but nobody has yet. And maybe you would just.
It doesn't really work like that, because there's like, insofar as there's any logical necessity, it has to work like this. Because it's like logic means distinctions. It means this predicate is defined on its complement. The excluded middle means either X or not X, which means X is not X. That's its identity. It's defined on a complement. It's a limited term. So so far as we're presupposing distinctions, it also means that we can put X and not X together, and we would have a union set. And that union set is presupposed underneath any distinction between X or not X. It's presupposed by any sort of limited logical identity or predicate. And so, this is saying that the essence of reality, however dynamic or unstable it may be, is it's unity. And the idea that one could desire something less than God essentially is presupposing the idea that distinction is somehow the last word, and you would say like reality theory, that somehow it doesn't all hang together. But what we mean by reality is everything, yes, hanging together. The mutual relatedness of things constitutes their reality, which is inherently mutual, their inter-reality. But if I say inter-reality to sort of define or elucidate reality, it's not actually really supplying any deeper meaning there, because that's always what we mean to say that things are real. I don't know what it could mean. It's almost there in the definition of desire to see the thing as infinite. Like I see this thing as desirable despite it not being.
Maybe you could talk about why people, including me, seem to have kind of a weird reaction to that, or like an instinct against it, or if there's some pragmatic level at which it wouldn't be helpful to think about things in that way, or
There's many pragmatic levels on which it's not useful to think about things in that way. Um, and if this conversation has to turn into one of those, then I'm perfectly okay with that.
I see. So the thing is the level at which you're talking about it, and again, I know we're kind of rehashing old stuff, but it helps me. The level at which you're thinking about it, we wouldn't probably call a practical level, but there, but I mean, at the same time, I think you would put forth. You would attribute some usefulness to.
If man had no impulse toward the transcendent, would he be in the image of God?
So you think this is just
We're not only, man doesn't live by practicality alone. Is
that's
another
good,
way you could put it.
but or does he? Like, no, yeah, I agree with you when you say that. Even though I'm calling it immediately into question.
Phlebas says, I lose personhood. I would say personhood is self and other are infinitely interdefined. There's no self that's monadically apart and not interdefined with the other.
Maybe you consider this like worshipful in some
If I'm only noting the infinitely fractally interrelated nature of self and other, and that sounds like losing personhood, so be it. There's no other real conception of a person that works. Sorry, Mitch.
That's okay. I was just suggesting that maybe you consider this line of thinking very worshipful.
Do what? Sorry.
It was just occurring to me that perhaps you considered this line of thinking very worshipful and was a meaningful way of interacting with God and with his body. And
it's about what all men have spoken of as God, the sort of the unity which is beyond the mere distinction, the arithmetic distinction between one and two. The unity of like unity and multiplicity type deal. So yes, it's quite reverent again, insofar as it's one's highest conception of the infinite, which all men speak of God. Surely anything finite would not be considered God.
what about these sort of? We're in the habit of attributing finite qualities to God. And it doesn't always seem to me like a misstep when we do that.
No, it's not. And I had something in there about one of my notes, and we actually, you and I spoke about it not too long ago. But see, now I put so many notes; they're not color coded or anything. I can't find it easily. Let me find it. Yeah. So okay. So we always start on the road of. That's what I really wrote in my notes here. It's like I wrote, the one begins infinitude, finds the infinite through finitude, and strange loops back to itself. So you always start on the road of logic, which has distinctions. You find where logic logically uh, leads to contradiction or the absolute, and then you realize the initial distinction between whatever two things, even logic and the absolute, to have been a type of the absolute. But we're starting in logic. Infinity is not a static value, like the last number of an infinite series is like a defined number. It's more so that it's an approximation, or it's the infinite is like one's highest conception thereof, and that is sort of successively approximated through the conjunction of superlatives. And we do that with God. And you see the Bible doing that with God, and God getting sort of more infinite, transcendent, and transcendent as you go. And that's very key. That's how I would say the one sort of finds itself through finitude or something like that. Yeah. People say I'm saying it's all God in such a way that we lose personhood, but it's presupposing that God is this thing that's defined on a complement, which doesn't work with God. But of course, the thing that is not defined on a complement is not this easily thinkable thing, and yet it's this concept that like sort of haunts the borders of any or all conceptual distinctions.
Is it not easily thinkable, or is it really unthinkable? And if it's really unthinkable, maybe the only way we're going to be able to talk about him is on a complement, and maybe that's okay. And
the only way you can talk about it, yeah, would in some sense be on a complement. Like the Tao Te Ching says that you can't know it, but you can be it. That's what it would be getting at.
mm-hmm.
The illimitable is like this contradiction
Probably
in
the
terms, because it's a limit to say it's illimitable.
sense in which you could be it. And again, I'm wondering about if man lives by practicality alone, even though I don't kind of in my gut agree with that. The thing about being it is, without knowing it, is it's not something you can, I always say, will around with. You can't, because you can't will that being, because that being is administered to you. Then again, I get stuck in thinking, well, I'm going to acknowledge the things that aren't practical, but when I'm communicating and when I'm thinking and when I'm behaving, it's squarely in the realm of the practical.
I think that the practical is like what 99% of all of our days. Can there be 1% where we actually? For me, I think about these things maybe a little bit too much, but
Well,
I
no,
acknowledge that it's not practical, but it's
that's
not
why
that.
to me, I think if I don't want to come and always be throwing a monkey wrench into what is maybe your worship. That's why I brought that up, is because it's like I can't. Cal knows this, Mitch. Stop badgering him about how we
No, you're
can't,
not.
actually pick up
You're
these
not. You're
screws.
not. And I'm also not making enough effort to understand you.
Well, yes. So I don't know. I just think, let's think about when if you sit with a group of people talking theology, if you sit back and think, wow, they're like, maybe you think this, or maybe it's just true. They're missing it at every turn. They can't seem to grasp God at all, and that's of course maybe the most natural thing in the world that they can.
No, yeah, I
Then
mean,
you still look at that and say, wow, that's you can only look at that as loving, from a certain perspective. It's like these efforts to try to know someone so deeply.
yeah. Well, gosh, yeah. Um, you talked about being as something administered to you and something you can't will around with. There's something I wrote down in my notes, and it's kind of crazy, and it was edited out of the only podcast appearance where I mentioned it. But I read it again. I think to me, it really says a lot, says everything basically, or it gets at everything. I think of eternity, or what is eternal. It relates to the firmness of a resolution or intention, and in the case of being God's, or whether one's identity is eternal, eternity relates to God's immemorial resolve to create us. And I said, suppose you were given godlike power to create or control the timeline of your own life. And let's also suppose that you have a child, in case that you're someone who doesn't have children. You would always choose a timeline in which the same child results, so to speak, comes into being, which, as far as I know, means always having to choose this particular timeline over and over. But that's kind of a rabbit hole, because it's not easy to tell someone apart from the specific circumstances in which their existence is, so to speak, terminalized or fully nucleated or whatever. This makes your child eternal for the purposes of this example, and this is what I think eternity means. It also critically has to do with identity, since love is seeing one's own identity, which is, I wrote / the identity, i.e. God, in the other. In other words, love guarantees this kind of immutably firm intention, firmness such that no alternative is even thinkable, because one cannot even conceive of oneself apart from the beloved. So inseparable is the beloved from one's conception of oneself. So any sufficiently great love on God's part is implying, in my view, a kind of eternity of the identity of the creature. Paradoxical. It's a paradoxical thing, because if you are made eternal, that can not be anything more than, from another view, to discover oneself to have always already been eternal. But there's a sort of way that it looks like creation looks like, at least on the road of logic, it looks like things being added to eternity. And there is also this thing where one doesn't suppose God is logically capable of forgetting, that whatever exists at any time in that sense must continue to exist for all times. On the road of logic, insofar as logic has any validity, it would seem an imperfection on the part of the infinite to be able to forget. So then there's this thing, and I wrote this, and I know this is not terribly helpful for anyone, but I wrote that, it is additive, and there's a particularity to it such that it can identify itself in a way that's almost the opposite of what one thinks of when one thinks that you can't really set infinity equal to infinity, because neither term is like a static defined term such that it can precisely match. They can precisely, one can precisely match the other. And so it's weirdly like self-defined, not undefined. The one, the ultimate reality in which we live and move and have our being, and whose ultimacy is such that every reality is ultimately that ultimate reality.
Cal, what were you saying earlier? You were talking about the Tao, and you said you can be it or something. What did you say about the Tao?
The Tao Te Ching says of the Tao that you can't know it, but it says, know the white, keep to the black. You can't know it, but you can be it. That at least is Wayne Dyer's extremely imprecise translation of the Tao.
Well, and I think, so one of the things where I was just listening to you, Mitch, which is like, I think Sherry talks about this a lot, but it's like the practicality of this stuff is like, you have to live it to find your way into the infinite. Like, just to kind of talk, you're talking about, Cal, like
how you live it is that if my image of the image is something that, like the identity, if my conception of God is something that you can be judged out of, then I know that it's not God, and I only desire it insofar as it is God or the highest. So it's bringing out a contradiction if I'm judging it, which means don't judge. That's a practical.
I think because we can think our way all the time, right? But I think kind of in its simplest sense, and I know Nate Heil agrees with this, like I think we were created to create, right? And all this stuff comes down to like living it. And then I think, like we were talking about desires and everything else, and I was just thinking about the prodigal son. And basically he goes up to the father and says, "You're dead to me, give me my inheritance," right? So then does the father argue with him? Nope. Just just gives it to him. And he goes out and blows it on sex, drugs, rock and roll. But then he remembers, like I think you were kind of touching it. Then he remembers who he is or what he is, right? He's the son, right? And so, so then he returns. I think there's, so anyway, Mitch, I was just listening to you talk about all this stuff, but I think it's in the living it, and that's where we try to practice the gospel virtues, or to do the will, or find ourselves on the narrow path. When we find ourselves in those places where we get into alignment, I think that's where that spark happens, where you find that unity and the multiplicity, and you find that connectedness with others and so on and so forth. So I think you have to, I think when you look at Christ as the example, his whole thing was like, you have to live your way into it. And then the revelation happens. And that's why when you mentioned that Tao thing, Cal, it like made total sense to me. Right?
Well, what stood out to me in the Tao thing, the distinction between the being and the knowing, it seemed like the being in this case was different than the living that you're talking about, because the living that you're talking about still seems to be very caught up, connected to, practical considerations. It's the type of being that you can't do without knowing. Whereas I feel like the be know distinction that Cal brought up was a different sort of thing that you couldn't will around with. And if the point is to, if the point is to live everything, there's got to be some knowing that's behind that living, or if there's something that's behind that living that isn't knowing or isn't practically entwined, then it's something that's out of our wheelhouse. I don't know. Abide in me and I in you, but what exactly should I do is always the thing. There's a certain administration from on high that we have to trust in to get about our business, and then but we're not in control of that administration. We rely on it and we trust in it, and then we get to work. Everything is meaningless. Now fear the Lord and keep His commandment.
Mm-hmm. I think that when you see practices, right, I joke a lot of times I'll put my name as the practical wooer, because I think it's the practice of the things, like you talked about biting, right? So there's a set of spiritual ascetical practices that you can start to do. You don't really know what's going to be the effect of these or whatever, but you set down this path of spiritual practices, whether it be fasting, prayer, these sorts of things. And there are lots of different ways that people do those things. And in doing those practical things, those are the things that open you up to the infinite, right? So for example, I've used this example of, I've had some long periods of time where I was very faithful to meditative liturgical prayer, which a lot of that prayer tied to the Jesus prayer, right? And then I would talk about that every 4 to 5 times. I found that in the midst of where I got to that place and do that, I lost time. Like I lost time, right? So I'm praying, I'm thinking there, I think it was 10 minutes and it was 35 minutes. And you know what I mean? Like literally nothing exists, I could equate it to people that it's different. But it's like when you're stoned and all of a sudden you just realize you haven't been paying attention for like about 20 minutes or something, something like that, or maybe whatever. But you get to those things. And so I think what that is when you do these, and so that's a very practical application. And, you'd mentioned abide in me and I in you. Like there are practical things that you do that then can put you in connection with, I can't describe loss of time as anything other than connecting into that infinity. I mean, that's got to be something of what that is, right?
Totally on board with this concept of what we do maybe kind of opens us up to that administration, but like you said, we still don't know. We don't know what's going to happen when we participate in these disciplines.
Hey, Cal, when you're talking about this earlier, I also was thinking about Rollins, the pursuit of the lack, the stuff like that. Like, I feel like that's a parallel thread to what you were talking about earlier. Is that similar?
It's absolutely similar. They're tracing the actual like sort of phenomenological outlines of desire and how it's experienced. And no philosophy or a fortiori no theology can be complete without some realistic sense of how that actually works. So I think that stuff is quite valuable in showing the way that the desire actually works. And it's what we want is what's unlimited. Mm-hmm. And to know a limit as a limit is already to be beyond the limit. And when one has sort of become when one has grasped what one formerly saw as unlimited, it becomes all too limited in one's hands, right. and not what one initially desired it as. And I think that the pursuit of the lack is all about that kind of thing. And so one wants to do theology in such a way that has that sort of accurate axiology, or that theory of valuation that ultimately sees valuation as a self-identification. But again, at that level of genericity where self is used without a complement. And then there's questions that arise, and that I was sort of breaking my head on this morning about, like, what one desires. Does one desire because it's an image of oneself, or does one identify oneself with it because it's an image of the image, or the infinite? I don't know. This is difficult. Of course, the way that I use these terms at least sounds messy, because they're all I'm trying to appreciate that on some level, that they are interdefined at a level of unity that's beyond sort of any initial thinkable distinction between unity and duality.
Well, and I think I keep saying this over and over, and I'm probably saying the quiet part aloud, but I think the reason why people find themselves to the little corner, no matter what their issue, whatever their thing is they're seeking God. Like, whether they know that they're seeking God or not, like that God-shaped hole, that pursuit, that image, that thing that we're driving towards. And, some of us pursue that in lots of different ways to do that, whether, it could be drugs, alcohol, sex, money, whatever you want to throw your thing towards. You can pursue a path, and some of us will hit those and hit brick walls or whatever. And Sherry talks about labyrinths, like we're in a series of labyrinths. There's only one way in, one way out, and so we keep hitting all these dead ends or whatever. But I think there's that. I think one of the things I find it's interesting is, I don't want to get into whether it's right, wrong, or different, I guess. But one thing to help me frame that when you're talking about that is, I really like the essence energy distinction that is in orthodoxy, because like that essence-ness is like, this is just the unknowable. Like, it's like it's beyond. Okay, so don't, like, God in essence is, there is no end to the infinity. Like, there's no end to the infinity. Like, it's out there. It's there's this thing. But then we participate with these energies, right? And there's this synergy, and there's the connectedness. So grace, love, all the actions of God, the energies of God, we participate in, and we can know Him through that, while never reaching the infinity. And that's the other reason why I like theosis.
You think that the distinction is eternal in this case? The way that I read Scripture is it says God is love. I think one way you can translate that is like the ultimate reality is unity, which to my mind means that there's no distinction that's eternal. In other words, every distinction ultimately breaks down.
It's kairos and chronos, right? It's both. It's both and, right? I think that's what's interesting contemplating Christ, right? Like, it's fully God, eternal, infinite, yet this moment in time, right? Which is the incarnational aspect. So it's this amazing marriage of eternity, kairos, chronos, right? And then even that, like, that happened at a very specific time, and a very specific place, and a very specific moment. And like you talked about, going back to say, I would always pick the moment in time that would generate my son, right? Like, okay, if you're gonna, so it's marrying both, right?
There's something else I put in my notes here to talk about, which was that now see, I won't be able to find it. It's like, in the moment, something, but in the moment, there's no such qualifier as in the moment. In the moment, each identity or state of consciousness is the identity. So in other words, what you're looking at is God to you, so to speak, in that moment. God, I mean, it's the highest good. You're looking at that and not anything else. Why? Because it's the highest good that you can conceive to look at least in that moment. But in the moment, there is no such qualifier as in the moment. So it gets into the way you would use different words, aseity or idempotence, of just the present moment, which is, it's like, if you that thing is his whole own rabbit hole, in the sense that you try to get into what is the present as such, you find eternity in God, because the present, you can't measure it, not as what it is, only as the past, which is what it notionally isn't. But anyway, that's so in other words, are we really focusing here on the distinctions, or are we always really more interested in is the unity? If the infinite, like as an integration of differentiation, like X and not X, is that basis on which any distinction between X and not X is intelligible? It's like, and if it's the truer type of the infinite, and yes, McMosav, nothingness and everythingness are pretty much, conceptually indistinguishable. Neither X nor not X equals both X and not X. If you negate both the predicate and the complement, or affirm both, it seems to have the same result. And so it's like, we can harp on distinctions, but I feel like almost like in good faith, we're not even really interested in the distinctions. We're interested in what's under them.
There seems to be a sense in which sometimes it's better to talk about things less accurately, which sounds counterproductive to what we're all trying to do here.
I like that. No, I like that, Mitch.
Craig, I don't love Craig's example, but he uses one that I don't have anything better right now. He'll say an example of this is all guns are loaded. It's better to say all guns are loaded, even though that's not technically accurate. It's just a better way to talk about guns, so that you handle them with care. I'm sure there's a better way to do that. Talk about it, but I haven't found it yet.
Unless you're a kid, then you shoot each other. I was thinking about that the other day. You'll find a stick and be like, sticks aren't loaded, and you'll shoot your friends. We encourage it.
See, in my own terms, Mitch sort of, he's negating what I am saying, because it's not corresponding to his image of like sort of what's ideally integrated. And he's not putting forward or specifying what his is, but that's okay, because you're not always necessarily able to do that, but you can at the same time, offer like one's sense or one's judgment that it doesn't match. Oh, Jason, are you raising your hand to ask a question?
To ask a question to you. Can I
Okay.
I have been like trying to get caught up and get ready for work and stuff, so I'm kind of like all over the place just trying to track this conversation. Can you give me like a rundown and a summary of what your vision is, and then I guess Mitch's? Are you saying people inherit, and what they desire is it ultimately God, because they ultimately desire the infinite?
Yes.
Okay.
It's been pretty
Yes.
all over the place.
And Mitch, you're saying that's not always the case, basically?
I had said early on that gave me some pause.
Okay. Well,
but in this
my
case,
question-
my pause was more related to getting rid of distinctions, and not focusing on distinctions, but instead focusing on ultimate unity. And that's where I was.
How do distinctions tie into it? Because
that's why I say we've been meandering a little, I think.
Well, can I ask this question then? If one is in, it seems like the question would be more. God, I don't know that I even want to ask this, because I feel like it would derail it from where Cal maybe wants to go. Because if what you desire and what you're aiming at, or what you want, what you're lusting for, is ultimately infinite, I think the only alternative to that would be non-being, right? And then it's like, can someone actually desire non-being? And I don't know that you ultimately could, but then even if you desire non-being, isn't that just your will? Isn't that kind of saying my will, like your will versus God's will, or something like that? I don't know. Does that make sense of what I'm even asking? Is this taking the conversation in a terrible direction? Let me know. No one's talking.
Well, if God's will is something that is like opposed to mine, seems to mean God is something other than myself, and that makes me wonder, what is the more ultimate reality beneath both him and me?
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to track because I'm just thinking. So
there's some very angry internet theists, fortunately none of whom are watching this conversation, but if they were, they would say y'all need classical theism, which even I've not been the greatest like fan of, but like what I'm doing right now is just straight classical theism.
So you're saying whatever I desire, I'm ultimately desiring God. Is that and then I'm saying, and I guess I was saying,
and you desire the good, and what you mean by I desire it is that I see it as good. It's kind of hard to escape.
Okay. Yeah, I get. Gosh, I feel I'm trying to bring forth Mitch's point here because I feel like there's I guess maybe this is
put something forward that says that gives the identity of the infinite one as a no and not a yes, and it's saying that there can be some eternal, I won't say bedrock because that's too horizontal, but it's some kind of eternally vertical no or distinction that somehow supplies the ground of intelligibility or functions as the ground of being.
Well, are there two
sides? That was awesome.
Are there two sides to desire, or I guess that's what I'm kind of asking too. If there's two sides to desire, because okay, in my mind, when I think of desire, I think of just the color red, and so it's just like that. You have, can you desire something in a parasitical way that ultimately needs? Because when I think of desire, I think of lust, I think of red, I think of wine, I think of pleasure, I think of blood, I think of all that stuff, and then being drunk. If you're desiring something finite, what you're saying ultimately you can't, is what you're saying. But that's why I was wondering if there is a way to, if the only way I can conceive of that you would actually desire something finite is to desire something like non-being. And I don't know that can be.
Even non-being does not easily bear description as finite, as the neither nor that's neither light nor dark. You know, what is the non-being? I'm going to say what? It's darkness simpliciter. That's a thing. It's defined, right? And to recognize darkness as darkness, one needs to be like a conscious being. So I'm going to say it's neither darkness nor not darkness. But, you know, that if I'm just categorically denying, it's going to seem to have the same equally unintelligible result as categorically affirming across both predicate and complement. Or yeah, to desire non-being. Well, I mean, there was something else I was saying. I kind of lost it.
Get it back.
I don't know.
Sorry, I feel like I messed up this conversation. I probably shouldn't join. I'm trying to catch up and track with you guys somewhere.
What I'm saying, it's all proceeding from the assumption that logic has anything to say at all. And if one wants to deny the validity or utility of logic, that, you know, that may be fine, so long as one doesn't make the performative sort of, if one doesn't sort of enact the performative contradiction of then invoking logic or trying to use it in the very next breath.
So, Cal, to me it seems like you've found a way to, in some ways, deconstruct like the notion of logic, like in this idea.
Logic logically requires its own complement in order to have the identity that we logically grant it.
Yes, and in that, you know, if someone's not thinking about that, they're just using logic, and they're moving on. But this you've found a way to deconstruct logic, which I
deconstruction of logic, that what you call the deconstruction of logic is simply God, who's not limited.
I understand.
So am I a deep postmodern deconstructionist, or am I a classical theist? I mean, I don't know that
That's what I'm. This is what you're doing is what I mean. What you're doing is what I mean. Like, you found a way where I can't handle this thing. There's no way for me to handle it, to use it. It's deconstructed. That's all I mean. Like, my tool no longer can do what I've been using it for, because look, it's in pieces. And I mean, which I think is great.
It still functions. In order to function, it requires as its background this non-logical thing.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't require you to see the man behind the curtain, right? It doesn't require you to see who's back there pulling the levers, and you're showing us who's, like, look what's behind this. It's like its own, like, the reason this works is because it doesn't work.
Distinction, are you ever seeing two things, or are you seeing one thing? That's the thing that kind of almost breaks your mind when you look at two things and trying to appreciate its two-ness. Then ask yourself, am I seeing two things, or am I seeing one thing? And then I think you do see behind the curtain in such a way that you realize that every moment of perception is always a seeing of what's behind the curtain.
Yeah, you do that and you're like, okay, now I'm back to work, because what else can I do?
No, well, I'm increasingly as one meditates more on the image of God, one sees that it is not other to what one experiences in every moment, and that's what it means, his immanence, that he truly is in everything.
It also, when you this is curious. I took one semester of logic at my liberal arts school back in 1988, fall of '88. So
that's more than me.
So I read, well, and let's just say I got through the class, but modus tollens, like I recognize the term modus tollens. But when we think about logic, so this is a question I have for you. So, McGilchrist's coincidence of opposites, right? And the matter with things. He's trying to show that, nothing ever exists. There's always, and he talks about the yin and the yang. And so, for example, to create music, you got to create tension. It's in this tension. It's in this paradox. Sure. It's in this coincidence of opposites that reality exists. How does logic account for the McGill? I think you're trying to point to something. That's why I'm asking the question. Is how does logic handle the true coincidence of opposites?
Logic accounts for itself by presupposing non-logic.
Okay.
That kind of tells you everything.
Mm-hmm.
It shows you that the overall picture is something bigger, and it must be logically.
But usually when we try to define something by the non-ness of itself, we throw that thing out, right?
I don't know. Did you throw out the world when you defined Mitch Caps in contradistinction to everything that is not Mitch?
No, but maybe I throw out Mitch if what causes Mitch to work is non-Mitch. But now I'm lost in the sauce.
There's no need to be, but maybe in some sense that being lost in the sauce is one's apprehension of God, which is also necessarily God's apprehension of oneself. It's not that, the vision of God is God's vision of you. It's that point of ultimate unity, of ontology and epistemology. If God were not that, then in the encounter of God as pure other, we would simply ask, what's the more ultimate reality beneath us both? That's what I'm saying. Like, insofar as logic has anything to say at all, it must be this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not even tracking anymore.
If you run logic to its ultimate end, don't you run into the I don't know?
Yeah.
I kind of understand that. I don't understand
it. Apprehend its finite, definite essence.
I don't know.
But if what we're talking about as God as the great unknown, then one wouldn't, from the standpoint of logic, say that knowing was what the operation that one performs, on it.
Mm-hmm. And have you read Esther Meek's book, Loving to Know?
Mm.
She had all that stuff based on Polyani and stuff. I wish Luke could jump in here. I think that's one of my books that's in my queue. I've never pulled the trigger on it, and I probably should, because he seems to have greatly impacted her. And I think, coming back to this God thing or whatever, that it would seem that to truly know and these other things that she's, it's that love is the basis of that, right?
Love is
the basis of knowing.
Love is, as I said, it's the self-recognition function of God. It's the yes that God says to his image, to himself.
And it's the yes that the created, just the yes the created says back. It's the let it be, right? It's the remembering, like the prodigal son remembered, like that mentioned that story, remembered who he was. He was the son. Like, I think we talk a lot about this stuff here, and I know Jess P's been playing around with this a lot. I know Sherry's played around with this stuff quite a bit, and so is Luke. Like, there's power in the remembering of who you are, like seeing that likeness and that imageness. And I think when you see that, then also that's the unity you talk about. It's the I think the divine spark happens when you have this moment that you are connected to all of humanity through this imageness.
I don't think that you and I are really talking about anything different at all.
Right.
I'm trying to tell you the way that I'm seeing these things. Like, in other words, if love is God's saying yes to himself, or seeing of whatever thing as being in his image, then in seeing the likeness between, love is it's the likeness between God and whatever is in his image, which means that it's the more fundamental identity between God and his imager, which means it's God more ultimately, which is to say, in another sense, that it's the only real God there ever was. It's the identity of God. So it says in the scripture, "Theos agape estin," God is love. Yeah.
I also think it's why I don't think God is ever going to destroy his images either. That's why I'm a this guy in the end.
It's a limited conception of God that says God's conception of God's self is so limited as that he would judge someone else out of it.
Well, limited, hopefully not being a derogatory term here, because again, sometimes it's right to take a more limited approach. In fact, it seems like God has given us limited, finite lenses and by which to view him, and limited, finite laws by which to participate in the world.
Is your lens really all that limited or finite? Did not I begin this stream with discussion on the sort of the infinitely nothingness nature of consciousness, when one tries to ascertain what that is apart from its contents or represented objects?
Yeah. I think from the ultimate perspective, this conversation is a laugh and a half. It's a mirror, just so dim.
That's really good.
I just wanted to jump in because Cal was struggling a little bit, and I wanted to jump in to help. But I haven't talked to Cal in a long time. But I love how Cal does these gymnastics, and then I try and map things onto them. I think Luke would talk about also the senses. This is that concept of exclusion for inclusion, like where you talked about limited or whatever. Like when you're like what you were just talking about there, Mitch. Luke talked that ultimately there are exclusions for ultimate inclusions.
Yeah, what I like about what Cal has done is he I haven't found anyone else to do it. I'm sure other people could maybe, but I always say that everything is deconstructible, and so what's most helpful is to have logic deconstructed, because when someone inevitably runs against a break in logic, they're too willing to cast off things that are actually good and true, and what they should do is instead is say, no, everything can be deconstructed. Calm down. Let's look at this in a different way. Maybe there's another reason I should hang on to this other than the logic checks out. And if you know that even the logic of logic doesn't check out, then I think you're in the catbird seat.
I don't know that the logic of logic doesn't check out. I view it as a sort of meta logic that understands the sense in which any approach that is based on defining, identities in distinction to their complement or their negation is itself going to presuppose that it has a negation or complement on which that it's defined in distinction to.
I think the
That's,
negation
to me,
means that
that's
the
not.
logic isn't checking out. I mean, but I think if you're negating the thing, then the logic is not checking.
If I'm saying that Mitch is not Mitch, I'm negating the negation. The logic is working. The logic is doing its job. That's what logic is.
Huh?
I got lost again.
It sounds enough in shambles that I would feel comfortably saying to someone, to my own ends, see, the logic doesn't even check out.
Well, I'm totally. I keep getting lost. Like I keep thinking.
I do recognize that what I'm saying, for someone would think I'm just saying these things to sound smart or something, that I'm completely making it up. I think you guys should be able to tell I'm a sleep deprived idiot. I'm not the person that can come out and impress people and knock their socks off with my smarts. I'm not even remotely like that. I'm some kind of technician. I've thought about this stuff for a long time. That's why I can see it from many different angles. I'm not limited to regurgitate or spit back some paragraph that I read in a book. I have a procedural intelligence. I can triangulate. I can walk around the thing. And that comes from it does come from having lost a lot of time thinking, if one considers it lost.
When Mitch talks about the limit or logic, isn't he just talking about the rule that survives its own judgment? Like you have to know the thing. Like he's talking about the limit, the seed, the seed that creates all reality. It is something finite in a way, except it's the thing that survives its own finitude. It survives its own judgment. I don't know if that's right. That's where my mind is kind of going, but then someone will say something else, and then I'm like, I don't know where this conversation is or where I am in it. So that's why I say I'm still lost. I don't think you're confusing me, Cal, or I mean, I wasn't trying to say that at all, but also the handsome appearance of Luke just threw me off balance.
Complete.
Yeah, I thought I could handle the stream, and then what happens? There was a little dog humping a stuffed animal next to me too. It's just been total chaos over here. No logic.
I think couldn't you say, in as much as like the unmoved mover, the idea that there's something behind everything else, some initial actor behind everything that you see? It's the same thing with logic. All the different distinctions you can make in logic, there's something behind that. It's the same idea.
Yeah.
It's really basic. It's so basic that like it's almost sounds stupid and really intelligent to say.
It does sound stupid and really intelligent at the same time, and that's kind of and that's the danger in going on a stream and even daring to just like suggest that I talk about these things in the way that I actually think about them. I don't know. Perhaps next time I should stream to fewer channels.
No, Cal. This is why it's important for you to do this. You're not the only one you are unique, but you're not the only one who thinks this way. Like you say,
I know I'm not. There's this whole freaking Neoplatonic tradition, that I've never bothered to read. But I know.
And people from this little corner, like how people show their thinking process. Other people can map onto that, and we're all different sorts of people, right? But what I've always enjoyed about you is I know you're sincere in your thoughts about this, right? You're very sincere, and it matters to you, right?
That's true.
And so there's an authenticity, and there's a sincerity about you. And I don't have the philosophical chops. Luke doesn't either, but he doesn't have to read the books to know the things. So, right, Luke? Like, you don't have to read the books to know the things. Or he can read a chapter and know what the book is about, which I think is amazing because he intuits it. But I am able to then take what you're talking about, and I try to. So I'm thinking, Rollins. I was thinking Ian McGilchrist. I was mapping it onto hesychasm in orthodoxy, and Gregory Palamas, the essence and energy. Like you were talking about all these things, and I was able to map it down to things that make sense to me. And then where Mitch was talking about, like what. Again, I just came on because you were asking for people to jump on. I wanted to be a friend and have a face on here with you. And then luckily Mitch jumped on or whatever. But then where I saw Mitch talking about was the practicality. And my name on one of Luke's live streams, I'm the practical wooer, because I think there are practices that you can do things and start living. And then all of a sudden, those are the portals into the infinity, where those things where it's revealed.
Yeah, I think the great portal into the infinity is non-judgment / forgiveness, which is also love. Same thing. It's the identity of God. Then you're seeing as he sees. And which is.
I have a question then. So getting back to desire then, if this thing's on desire, I mean, I kind of beginning. So if that is the portal to the infinity, as something like love or forgiveness, then is desiring something other than that ultimately finite? Like, because that's one thing I kind of run into this little wall with myself, where people talk about the good, the true, and the beautiful. I'm like, if I'm desiring those seem to have a finitude, or like they can have a finitude if I'm not ultimately holding them in something on forgiveness, like on a seat of mercy.
And so far as it's opposed to anything else in its definition, then that's the definition of finitude.
Gotcha.
And so what I wrote something about that here, and I know I didn't write it very well, but and I
we're here for the cow quotes. Let's do it. Cow quotes.
Yeah, man. If you want, I'll just read all these notes, and you'll descend into pure insanity.
Do it. Yeah.
I'm trying to find like the like I can't.
It's nice to see you as well. Hop in here while Kyle's looking for his quotes. I'm gonna look up the trip desire. Say something.
Hey, Teo.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah.
Also, great album, Sandy McCracken, Desire Like Dynamite. There you go. Check that one out.
I'm trying to look up.
Maybe I didn't even pull it onto this thing. I'll go find it in my keynotes.
So Chad said to look up the etymology of it. Does it just have to do with like appetite or something? I don't understand.
Etymology of what?
Desire. He said it's important.
Good question.
Yeah, so some things I map onto. So and I'll just share, like in Orthodoxy, it talks about passions, right? And it doesn't mean you destroy the passions. Like it's understanding that you need to put them in their proper place. Like a desire for sexual relation with your partners is a good thing. That's procreation. That's other stuff. But all that stuff is, in proper relation. And the interesting thing is that what they find is the first thing you start is controlling your gluttony. The easiest thing you can do is try and fast, right? Because it's hard to try and get higher levels of attainment of spiritual awakening. Yeah. Like that's the stuff that's the end of this long road of whatever it is. But you can like literally stop what you're stuffing in your face right now. Like that's a good place to start. And it's like, so it's the place where you start controlling your passion. So that's like, so again, it's all these lofty concepts, but you start down here, and at the end of the ladder of St. John Climacus, or if you would look at the Evagrius Ponticus, what you would see in Orthodox theology, the ultimate where you can see where you're at in your journey is where if you truly have love for your enemy, like that's the highest likeness, right? And so you'd mention that. And so kind of a spiritual check on yourself to see where am I at in my journey is when I'm being persecuted, like even at its worst sense, am I just sitting there with this pure love towards this person? I mean, I have not reached that, but you start with controlling your stomach, and the end goal is love for enemies. And by the way, that's a long journey.
Well,
Well, it's kind of just not getting what you want, right? I mean, that's like, I mean, I'm in the middle of that right now. I always want to make it more relationally practical because you can talk about all the ideas, but then you keep them in the abstract and at arm's length and they're useless. So, like my thing right now is sad, and that's true. Like I'm sad and I'm basically depressed. I was talking to Jason about this before I came on here because I haven't been living properly. I had a really bad interaction with my son last night, and then I'm sad, and I can spiral where like essentially my wife and I were going to go on a day date today and spend some time together, and she basically just doesn't even want to be around me because I'm just a buzzkill. And so then it's just like so in that, like, what does it mean? This is like, these are the conversations I like to have because like you could talk about like the logic behind the logic and the unity behind all distinctions. Like, who cares? You know, I mean, it's fine. I do that all the time. But like at the end of the day, it's just like, what does that mean for me when I'm sad and feeling sorry for myself and it feels like my family doesn't want to be around me? Like that's what, you know, that's the practical shit. Yeah. And so it's, what does it mean? So my desire is to be loved and desired. What happens when you're not? Then what do you do?
Never felt more connected with you, Luke.
Well, I mean, it's like, this is why I'm always talking about family stuff because like it's not abstract, it's not ideas, it's relatable to everybody, and there's no bullshitting. There's like no bullshitting your real family relationships. And if they're whatever, good, bad, healthy, not falling apart, like that's the truth. Like that's the most intimate, real stuff. So I don't know. I mean, like I'm currently struggling with that. Now, I'm not even.
Question, if I can be a little bit adversarial here, is that if that's the real stuff, why do you come onto the stream that is about the intellectual stuff to say that instead of going and doing the things with your family, kind of thing?
Well, because part of it is because
emphasis here for a moment.
Yeah, part of that is because I don't. I'm not trying to like. I'm not trying to take over the stream, but I'm trying to relate.
Relevant to you.
It is relevant to me, but it's also I'm trying to relate the abstract stuff because it's not like I think the abstract. I mean, you and I spend how much time talking about the abstract stuff? A lot. But I don't. I've always said I don't care about the ideas in and of themselves. I care about philosophy, applied wisdom. Like that's love. So that stuff's great. But then you got to figure out how to use it in your life. And so that's what I'm trying to bring right now is like, okay, great. All this stuff is true. And I'm sad right now. And I desire to be seen and held. But yet I'm not very holdable right now.
Maybe one cannot relate to what I see as desirable in this if one has not spent a lot of one's time breaking one's head on problems, so that when one encounters the solution to the problems, they are desirable to the extent that they are transcending. They are the solution to some damnable limit with which one is always contending, with which one can't identify oneself. It's all too finite. And so like the negation of your identity, the suffering that you have in always being wrestling with some problem and not making headway, and the damn thing always keeps coming up when your mind is supposed to be occupied with something else, and only just now is the solution within arm's reach, but you can't take it because you're too tired or because someone comes in and interrupts you just now. So the world, the lived experience that this is coming out of is not one with which everyone can necessarily relate, although they also can, because everyone does think about similar things in their own way. I won't say the same things to make it seem as if I'm just somehow beyond everyone in this absolute hierarchy, when in truth, the hierarchy exists uniquely for each one, and each one is at the top of his own hierarchy. That's a more accurate way to begin to see. But you know, it's like, man, I think about this stuff all the time. Like what it Yeah, well, like I desire what I want is to be seen in hell. What I want is for the infinite. What I want is the infinite. Like I see myself in God, and He sees Himself in me, and then, or like I want love, which is the type of, me seeing myself in God and God seeing Himself in me. And then the question is, what is the self that is seen if it's not in God per se or in you per se, but it's infinitely interdefined down this Drosta effect, hall of mirrors. And so we sense as a whoever offers us unconditional affirmation or validation, we sense as a type or an image. That's why I keep talking about the image of the image, an image of God, or God who's identifiable with His love. And so we see God in whoever is offering us that kind of unconditional love or validation. Now the question is being asked, like, if one is not receiving that validation or affirmation of one's identity. Because what I tried to offer, if it were possible, a reduction of love. What is love? Is the affirmation of one's identity, and then even to offer a reduction or a deeper definition still of what affirmation is, which is mirroring, which is interesting. But I don't think I'll have time to get into that now. But if you're not being affirmed, kind of what are you doing with that? Jason told me the other day, like, kind of like we're talking about the genesis of, I'll spell the transliteration. How's that? The spell the vocalization. YAHWEH, as like a storm god who becomes more than a storm god, and Baal is merely a storm god. And then, like, if your storm god doesn't give you rain, what do? Are you still going to love him in the drought? Jason asked. A genius question. I'm reflecting on that, and that's what I feel like what's going on with you right now. And
what do you? Is it also love to not be affirmed?
It's love. It's love to stay in it when you're not getting the affirmation. And what I would say, surrender of my will for Thy will, means an identification of myself with the other, who's a type of the unknown, both X and not X, which is the proper self-identification of the self as the God that one always desires in everything. Sorry, Jason.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I don't think it's always I'm not quite sure how you're using the word affirmed. Like, I think you're maybe meaning it a little different than a lot of people might be hearing
Mirror it back, say it back.
Yeah,
that's actually
well, just affirming someone. I think love, like, weirdly consumes you as well. And so, like, there's parts of you that are finite, and if love is infinite, it wants to break those off. It wants to make you more like itself, more loving. So it's not going to affirm every aspect of yourself. I would think it would recreate you in its own image. So at times it would feel like you're being consumed or torn apart, because you literally are. So, like, when Luke's talking about this, he wants a love that's unconditional. And so,
yes,
and he wants to be loved in an unconditional way. And the only way to do that is to encounter the unconditional love. But that's going to make you, in turn, love unconditionally. And so every part of you that is loving conditionally is going to be ripped apart. That's what I mean, where, like, our love runs a course. Like, in Christianity, it just, like, in a lot of, like, this stuff, we always find a condition. Like, there's always a condition where our love just stops. And it's like, the only way to actually get that is to actually be, like, go through to have all things, like, to really have the world. God gave you the world. You are the world. You are all things. You are every sinner. You are the pedophile. You're the murderer. You're every single person. And you're all of that. And you're God. Because, like, you are infinite. Like, when you actually love unconditionally, if you could just love without a limit, it's like you could have all. It's all right there. Like, it's all there. But we always put a condition on it.
Love much.
And so you're wanting that. And so when you're wanting someone to love you in that way, it's like you're encountering that love, and that feels like it's ripping you apart, because it's taking apart all of the pieces of you that are still trying to love with a condition. It's like, well, I can't love this. Like, obviously this person couldn't make it, the nerd person could be back, and, like, this, because there's always a limit to the love or something like that. That's how it seems to me.
Whatever
so I would think
it's not destroyed.
Yeah, and so I don't. Yeah, and so I don't know that it's, like, always. I don't think it affirms, like, or affirms or upholds those aspects of you. Like, it weirdly, like, just consumes them, because God is, like, jealous. That unconditional love is, like, jealous. That's what I mean with, I think, the weird thing with forgiveness. It's like we're when you forgive in order that you might be forgiven. I'm like, just try it, because I don't think it works that way. Like, I think if someone comes to you and punches you in the face and you say, well, I have to forgive them so that way I can get to heaven. It's like, or let's say, like, to actually forgive them, it's like you have to actually give your life. You actually have to put down a part of
You have to
yourself.
actually see or desire their own good, which is to see them as good or desirable, to love them. But if you're only doing that for your own good, it's like it's still not literally only for my own good. It's a seeing of no good in them.
But when you do it for your own good, it's like, that's what I mean. Like, you run into this thing where I think it will transform you. If you're like, well, I have to forgive them just so I can get forgiven. It's like, well, if you actually do forgive them from your heart, if you make that choice, then you're going to continually have to negate yourself, because it's like, this can harm me.
So that you can love them.
Yeah. And so then you continually,
your image of the image can be broad enough so that you can see them as being in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it like literally, it ends up being just like, it ends up being, I mean, it's not about you when you forgive someone. That's the whole purpose of it. So it's like, I'm forgiving him. It's not about me. And then, sorry, I'm talking too much. Go.
No, I'm talking.
No, Jason, you were brilliant. Thank you so much. First of all, I'm gonna slow this whole the way down, so I apologize for that. Because to start with, Cal, I think you're brilliant. Genuinely, I genuinely, because, and the reason is because you say words that I don't understand. Like, you say a sentence and I'm still trying to figure out what the previous words mean, do I remember what? And then you've gone with. So
hopefully it's not because of any of the individual words.
No.
Because
Not
the way that I'm putting the ideas together.
Not at all. I think it's more to do with my posture of receiving it. And I, similarly to Luke, but to a way less degree than Luke, I can sort of intuit things without really grasping them fully. So,
everyone does and can and can do so better than I can in their particular way of doing what they do and seeing as they see.
Yes, exactly. So when I first jumped on it, and I was just I felt a little bit trollish in the Iveman a little bit, but I
deserve all the hate and the pushback and the trolling, because
I think that's more to do with me just trying to like find a way to grasp it. And thankfully, Jason, you've been very helpful in me being like, okay,
Jason is like the best theologian in the little corner, in my opinion.
I agree. And I think Luke also is very helpful, because
Luke is the reason I got into the little corner, because I saw Luke talking. It wasn't about PVK or JBP, even though I knew about them both pretty deeply. I saw Luke talking about universalism and the thing behind the thing and behind the thing, and I was like, all right, get in the comments, like, how do I talk with this man? Set me up a talk with this man, please and thank you. Enter. That was how I got into
that makes complete sense, because as you were speaking, I couldn't quite grasp the fact of the matter you were putting down. The mythos of what you were pointing at was easily graspable for me, because I've listened to so much, probably too much, Luke Thompson, and he's colonized me in ways that I would not like to admit.
He's colonized my thinking too in ways that are good.
Yes, and probably,
or at least when I see it mirroring or resonating or rhyming with Luke, then it feels good, feels correct.
And I also want to take it all the way back to I think a brilliant comment, a brilliant sensitivity that Mitch showed in first asking you if this is like a form of worship for you, this ruminating over these ideas before not so much attack their ideas, but give a pushback against them. He asked, is this like a form of worship? And I think that is so sensitive, and I just want to commend you for that, Mitch. And then catching up,
Mitch, he's the. Oh, hold on, sorry. Sorry, guys, hold on.
It's fine. Yeah. So thank you for that, Mitch. But after saying all of those, I want to give a pushback to the last thing you and Jason were talking about, because as you were going back and forth, the story of the parable of the accountant that basically scams his master but still somehow gets welcomed into the kingdom comes to mind. You did everything so that he could be rewarded. Like he forgave the debt of the master's debtors so that he could receive at least so that he can have a backup plan when the master kicks him out. And rather than kicking him out, the master says, I see what you did there. So I think that story I don't know if I understand what you guys were pointing out, but that story was just flashing in my brain. That is all.
No, it's good. I love that story because the shrewd, what does he call him? He calls him shrewd or something, and he's dealing in forgiveness. That's what I think is so profound about that story, that I think I often missed. That's what I mean when I say, like, as soon as I started framing my theology around forgiveness, that just everything started making more sense to me, because the what is it? The steward, the unjust steward, like he's dealing unjustly, quote unquote, you know, because he's giving people forgiveness instead of making them, you know, and so that way he can have an everlasting home, because like his mercy endures forever. His mercy endures forever. Like, what's the one thing that's everlasting? That's what Cal said before, when you get into, you know, forgiveness and love, to him seem to be the same thing, and that gets into that opens the door to something everlasting. Because when you forgive somebody, even if you're doing it for your own benefit, that you might be forgiven later. That's what I was saying. Like, you are, even if that's your first intention, it's like it's gonna contradict itself, because you have to give of yourself, like die. Like when you actually forgive somebody, it's like, this person owes me. I'm going to lay down my life. I forgive them. I forgive them. I forgive them. And you're constantly negating yourself. So you're finding that unconditional love, that giving of yourself for the other person. And so even if you're doing it ultimately for your own salvation or own forgiveness later on, or own mercy, you're recognizing the one thing. To me, that's the one seat, like we were talking about earlier, the judgment that survives its own, the rule that survives its own judgment. It's forgiveness. And so you're noticing, you're encountering God's mercy every time you're doing that. And because the only reason for you to not do that is to say, I don't need it. Like, that's the only reason. Like, it's to say, I won't need forgiveness. I'm good without it. I'll never need it. So therefore I won't forgive. And then it's like, good luck with that one. Because then you'll find yourself at some point just wanting and yearning and desiring that unconditional love, where you want to be loved in, you know, when you're up, when you're down, like Luke says, when you're sad, when you're in all these states. Like, you want a love that goes with all those conditions and is still there to just like surround you, no matter what state you're in, you know. And so I think that's, to me, I think that's what always struck me as the most profound thing about that story. Once I realized that, is that you'd call him unjust because he's forgiving people their debt, but it's like that, what other justice is there to just keep weighing the scales for all eternity? It's like, you can't do
I think
that.
I think that goes back to McMosoff picked up on this early in the conversation. What would it mean for God to desire mercy, not sacrifice?
Yeah, see, that's one thing that's so interesting to me too, though, because I'm like, he says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And I remember thinking this a long time ago. I was like, but mercy is a sacrifice. Like, if you're telling me to be merciful, I'm like, I have to give up, like, I have to sacrifice myself. And so it's like, yeah, that's the own nature of it. It's like you're sacrificing yourself for the sake of the other, is kind of what mercy is. But yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were speaking that there's a temptation to want to stew in the self-righteousness of having been wronged, and you have to give that up if you're going to forgive.
Yep.
Jason, talk about how that giving of the thing up is a surrender of one's own identity, or a negation by oneself of one's own identity.
Well, I thought you were better at talking at that, but because I think you're the first one to point that out to me. I can't remember.
You're
who
right.
it was,
I am
but
better
like
at talking about that.
any truth you hold is like you're finding I mean, you're better at talking about it. Where it is.
I mean, I'll give it
a
a shot. The beginning, my entry point into it might already seem a little bit opaque, but it's what I said about, in the moment, whatever identity you're seeing is the identity. But at least in the moment. But in the moment, there's no such qualifier as in the moment. So the object of consciousness is the identity of the consciousness that has that object. Now, if someone comes along to mess up the ideal integration that I had in my consciousness as its object, he's put something askew so that my TV now, which was my identity, now it's little fuses and things they don't they're not ideally integrated as they were, so that it doesn't function as a TV to transcend the limit that makes it desirable as a TV, then I've lost my identity, because the TV was my identity. And so in order to forgive him, I have to part with that identity, or find a deeper identity than the TV. But what is my identity that I've always already had? The identity of the infinite as static defined number, like the last number of an infinite series, it doesn't work. My conception of the infinite has always been necessarily, it would seem, in the nature of a conception, like a greater approximation. And I was always working at the highest conception that I could presently form, but now I'm forced to go still deeper. But the truth is that if I could perceive anything as being the negation of my identity, it means that beneath my identity in that thing was a still deeper identity, which is like on an emergent, unspoken, as yet consciously unknown level, is my deeper identity, and that I'm descending to and becoming, like, as a result of the fire for, forgiveness, like T.S. Eliot, like he said, something hope or else despair lies in the choice of fire, or of pyre or pyre, to be redeemed from fire by fire, kind of thing. Our only hope or else despair lies in the choice of pyre or pyre, to be redeemed from fire by fire. So that's what I was saying. McDonald said that everything that can be destroyed will be destroyed. Why? Because whatever I desire as the necessarily beyond whatever initial juxtaposition of X and not X that I put up. Which is to your earlier point about how, like, the idea of the true, the good, and the beautiful, like, there has to be something behind and beyond them. Yeah. Some good that's beyond the distinction between good and evil. With David Bentley Hart abhors in his book, The Doors of the Sea, he says whatever's beyond good and evil is simply evil. But it's not really true, because if what we desire is the infinite, then that's already illustrating the sense in which the good that we desire is necessarily beyond any initial juxtaposition or thinkable distinction between good and evil.
I want to talk about this identity piece there. It's interesting you use this word. Chad and I had this conversation with this sociologist who was trying to figure out what's going on here. And she kept using academia and identity. And it just kept hitting me. And I was kind of trying to figure out, what are we doing here? Because I do, like, in today's day and age, I made the point that like the word identity is like, that's a charged word right now. It is, right? There's a lot of people that are playing around with identity, and I think what you just talked about is that, and I was curious how you were going to go with actually using that word identity, is you realize, like, and you do, I think you get it from TV, other places, but there's these things that are surface level, that aren't deep enough, right? And you talked about having to blow through that, which is, I was just thinking out loud all over the place because I'm an intuiter.
Well, one identifies with whatever one's god or idol is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And some of those idols are, that's what they are, because they aren't the ultimate beauty, truth, and goodness, right? A goodness and truth. And so I think ultimately where you start coming into, and this is the unity and multiplicity, is I think ultimately it's remembering or coming to the realization that you are made in the image of God, right? Like you bear this likeness and this imageness. And that's not something that you've given yourself. It's like, it's who you are. Right. So like Chad mentioned, and he might be posting this on his channel sometime too. He mentioned that he identifies as a husband. I said, do you identify a husband, or are you a husband? Like, those are two different things. Like, people can identify, like, no, you are a husband. So that's who you are. Right. So, and I think that's one of the problems I think we have. And so she was wanting to ask, like, could you identify as a Christian or whatever? And I've heard a lot of people say this, but I'd rather not to be identified as one, but that my life that I'd be recognized as one, right? There was a guy named Chuck C. who talked in 12-Step Circles, a famous speaker, and he talked about, people ask him what his religion is. He says it's the way I live, right? But I think that's kind of, Christ says that over the place. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? You know, those sorts of things. And so I think what you were touching at there is when you went down is, I think, and then I think so. So really, what I see you doing, Cal, and I've seen you do it for years, is you think about all these things, you know, and you're always having conversations about them or whatever, is you're trying to find, as Luke would say, the thing behind the thing behind the thing, you know?
Well,
Right.
aren't we all? I think
I
that's
can I give one more example before Jacob
yeah.
jumps in here? So like when you were talking about the negation of yourself as like the act of forgiveness is kind of negating yourself, or my mind, and then as you were talking about with the TV, an example of everything is my mind went like if I define myself as, if I say lying is wrong, so I say lying is the truth that I hold to, it's wrong to be a liar, and I define my own identity as not being a liar, and I kind of pride myself, I wouldn't call myself a liar, I'd say I'm an honest person, but then someone lies to me, and it's like I can either never speak to them again or I can forgive them for lying to me. But the way to forgive them for lying to me is I'm giving up my ideal, something I'm trying to become. Like I'm trying to become an honest person. And so I'm weirdly having to like kind of lay that down to further integrate them. And the only way I know to do that is to really be honest with myself and be like, have I ever been a liar? You know, and that's why I'm always saying my hypocrisy knows no bounds. Because it like
So you're
all
not
the
giving it up,
truth,
Jason.
all the truths I'm holding. No, I'm not giving it up. But you know what I'm saying? Like I'm still holding it. I still hold it to a core piece of my identity because it makes me who I am. But
Well,
I'm
the
holding
question
that
at least
truth.
arises: how can I love this person, i.e., see him in the image of my highest ideal, if my highest ideal is this, and he's manifestly not in the image of that? So the question at least arises: how can I love him without essentially having to give this thing up? And what one finds is if one does give it up, one only replaces it with something more.
I mean,
more exalted or better or truer.
It's not like, I mean, it's not like saying like I quit and I say, okay, lying's okay now. It's not that, like, that's not what I'm saying at all. And I hopefully it's not coming across that way. I guess what I'm saying is I have to give, if I'm truly being honest with myself, the truth runs deeper. And that's what I mean, where like the truth ends up becoming, I find no fault in this man because I'm actually a liar as well. And so that's what I'm saying. Like your hypocrisy, the truths you hold to, your hypocrisy is going to, those will find you. And until you get to that one rule that survives its own judgment, where that's why I love that Tombstone movie so much, where Doc Holliday says that. It says, my hypocrisy knows no bounds. Then on his deathbed, he says, it appears my hypocrisy only goes so far. Because now you've gotten down to that one truth where it's like, okay, now my hypocrisy, I found the truth that survives its own judgment. And it's something like, it almost gets to that imagery where like I can't really describe it other than truth, like something like truth or your ideal, your God sitting on the mercy seat, and it looks like in the tabernacle to me. Like it's like that is something undefinable. I don't know. Anyway.
Wow. I mean, what kind of an entry point into what you're saying, the way that I talked about it on the podcast was like, there's two ways to interpret judge not, because with whatever measure you measure, you're going to be measured, so it will be measured unto you. One is this way, like if I'm judging, I'm standing in judgment over Sam Bankman-Fried, who destroyed like $8 billion of wealth through fraud. And I say that he is out of the image. He is not good. He's damnable. He's just, a fraudster or whatever. And I'm surviving this judgment because when I apply the rule to myself, I pass it, which the rule is, did I destroy $8 billion of wealth through fraud? Which the answer is no. So I'm golden. That's one way to interpret it, but I don't think that's really what it's getting at. I think because the question is, why is it wrong to destroy $8 billion of wealth through fraud? Well, deeper principle, it's wrong to steal or waste resources. And have I ever stolen or wasted resources? Like if I'm pushing it, because it's wrong to steal any amount of money. Have I ever stolen any amount of money? No. We'll say, well, but why is stealing money wrong? Because it's wrong to steal or waste resources. Have I ever not given my full attention at work? Well, was I then guilty of stealing or wasting resources in that moment? Yes. Now it's not on the same level. And certainly if the horizon line is sort of like, if you were not going to live forever, then that's, it's kind of like a sunset on whatever evil that one does. And I think that's why the ancients thought that the evil and the not evil, they go to the same place.
I like the example you gave in your podcast of stealing an orange. It's like, I didn't steal $1 billion, so I'm okay, but I might have stolen an orange. And it's like, well, when you steal the orange, you also steal the seed. So then you could steal an orchard of fruit trees. So, and then, like, if you look out across infinity, it's
opportunity
like,
cost.
If you hold to that one judgment, at least I didn't steal $1 billion. It's like, the longer time goes on, it's like, well, now it's found you, and now you're a hypocrite.
If he had had that cent, if that investor from whom I stole had that penny at compound interest for however many centuries, then it would be a lot of money. And that will always be 1 penny less than he could have had, et cetera. And so, but yeah, it's like, if you're gaming it out over the longest of time frames, then what really if you're an eternal being, in other words, then what really matters is the principle underneath an action. And the principle that says, my enjoyment of this orange is worth more than what it may be worth to him. Like, I'm sort of eternally worth more than he is, or something. It's problematic over the longest of time frames, because it's hatred, it's murder. I said that he's not in the image. My image is such that he's not in. My image of the image is such that he's not in it. It means that I'm not seeing, by the true light. Which is, I'm self-condemned, because that's all I ever wanted. I'm not identifying with what I want to identify with.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful, like, the love-hate distinction. You were talking about that in your most recent podcast, to hate father and mother, and that kind of idea.
It's almost like people listen to my podcast. It's surreal.
But I have to, they're just clips from signal messages, so I have to hear which signal messages that I was not privy to.
Yeah, if you've heard the signal messages, then you've heard the whole podcast, pretty much.
So, but if love is this infinite thing, then to not love truly or singly is to hate. It's just like, whatever is not infinite is, by comparison, I mean, it might as well be hate, So, and we're always doing that all the time. I mean, who's loving purely?
So I only jumped on because the judges stream starts in 20 minutes.
Oh, Snapdragon.
And so you guys, I would prefer if you wrap it up at least off my channel by that time. You don't have to, actually, because people can't stream twice, but I would prefer people were nice to each other and coordinated, and that was scheduled. I didn't, but this discussion reminded me, so there's a reading of Exodus 23:5, which, the obvious reading of Exodus 23:5 is, when you see the donkey of your enemy crouching under its weight, you should help him, right? And in the Hebrew, there is a way of reading it, which the Baal Shem Tov taught, which is that, and you can see it in the Hebrew, but
I'm pulling up the Hebrew just now.
But so, okay, I mean, we can do the Hebrew if you want.
Just to see what you're seeing. You said it's Exodus 3?
23.
Oh, Exodus 23.
Here, I'll pull it up.
Hey, Cal, shout out the name of your podcast so McMo can find it.
My podcast is very deliberately hidden. The podcast is called Fragments, which is an ironic name for the podcast that's about integration.
I'm gonna put it in the comments so everyone will know.
Podcast again about universalism. Oh wow! If you see the donkey of the one who hates you, I already love this.
Okay, so the simple understanding is that that the donkey is crouching under its weight, and you should not keep yourself from helping him because you hate him, but you should help him unload the donkey. That is the simple reading of the verse. The way the Baal Shem Tov read it was, when you are shown materiality, which is a way of reading this word donkey, chamor, sonecha, it is your evil inclination. It is crouching under its weight, and you are missing something. You should flee from it. You should surely flee with it. So the way the Baal Shem Tov explained this was, there is a reason why God is showing you this particular sinner. Yes, that person has a sin, but there's a reason why you are seeing that sin, right? God has put you in that place so that you should see that your evil inclination is his evil inclination of that sinner that he is crouching under, and together you should remove this sin, both from yourself and from him. Now, that's beautiful, and I've always been a proponent for Hasidic Christianity. At the same time, I really, really dislike when people equate sins that are in no way comparable, right? And when people say, I am the worst of sinners, my usual reply is, how many people did you eat, rape, and kill today? Not necessarily in that order. Because Jeffrey Dahmer was actually doing that, right? And while it's a nice thing to recognize, yes, I have some relationship with that sin, it is over-intellectualizing it to make yourself equivalent with that sin, right? It's not the same.
Do you think that if someone looks at Jeffrey Dahmer and says that they weren't given the grace or the light that I've been given, and that's why they do what they do, but I, even having seen of God all that I've seen, I still do these sins sometimes, that makes me worse? Do you think that they have an argument then?
So there's the famous letter of Nachmanides, which many Orthodox Jews read at least one to his son, which many Orthodox Jews read once a week, and some people read every day. And I highly recommend it. It's available all over the place. In which he says, whenever you see someone, if they are richer and better than you, you should say that this person is more deserving than I am, and if they are more sinful and right, then you should say, well, I had opportunities that he did not have, right? And that is a good exercise to have. My problem is when people take this too far. And you can take anything too far, which is what people always do. Like, if you could reduce your Bible to just a few verses, guess what? God would have just given us a few verses. There's a reason why your Bible is so long. Because, no, you can't reduce things to one thing. And that's what gets me so
except Jason says that forgiveness cannot be taken too far. It is the transcendent rule that always survives its own judgment. So do you hate Jason?
And I love Jason because
I don't say that, by the way. Only he says it. I'm putting him up in front of you.
I love the people who say God is love and turn that into an idol. And I love the people who say God is justice and turn that into an idol. But whenever you turn the ineffable into an idol, you are turning the ineffable into an idol. And it is a mistake, and it will destroy you.
So, I still have to think about all this more. There is a way, because when people push me on this
I'm
stuff, I
right.
will say, like,
Shari
I'm always
said,
still,
no, it's over.
It's over.
yeah, there you go, there you go.
It's over.
It's both and. Exactly. It's both and.
Uh,
It's coincidence of opposites. It's paradox.
Well, I have this inclination in me where I'm like, if I want someone to murder me or kill me, I would want it to be my brother or my father or someone that's closest to me. Somewhere where I identify myself within them the closest. Like I'm in their image. So that's why like when I'm still like when I'm pressed with any of these questions, I still say like I'm pro death penalty. And I know I run into that conflict with certain people like in this little corner, but I was like, well, you know, you eat of this fruit, you will die. So it seems like there's a necessity there that it that judgment, if the judgment isn't severe, isn't extreme, then the forgiveness isn't extreme either, and the love isn't deep. And that's something like I feel like that's true, but then you know, you can stab someone in the back or you can stab them in the stomach. I'm just speaking in riddles now, so this is probably not making any sense. But I guess what I'm saying is like if I did one of those evil things, you can name anything you want. Like if I murdered somebody, I had to face the judgment, the death penalty or whatever. I would want the person who is killing me to be forgiving me simultaneously, because then they're seeing themselves I'm still in their image. Does that make sense? And so I know that I'm receiving my just due, but at the same time, they're still my brother. And so that's why, like, I don't know if that makes sense. I'm like trying to find the right language around that.
Does. It does make sense, and I could talk more about it. But I'm. The thing is that we don't have much time. We've got like 8 minutes to clear out or something.
Yeah, I gotta head out too because I gotta get to the courthouse. But
yeah.
So if I need to be murdered, I'd want you guys to do it. So
basically, I would spin something about how the infinite, you know, it's like what we desire, see it as desirable to the extent that it's infinite. You know, it's our highest conception of the infinite, because it's not like the conception of the infinite is out there as the static number that you can just grab it and put it in your mind. And so there is the thing where everything that is in God is God. And you know, it's too much to explain in a little bit of time. But basically it's like in some sense God is like the rule that survives its own judgment, or it's the self-including set of all sets. It's like it's simultaneously God is everything. It's like there's everything that exists, and then there's its container, and then there's like the reflexive operation of seeing oneself in addition to all that exists, and it goes on sort of infinitely sort of upward and onward, and there's this test of reflexivity that has to be met, and which God is meeting sort of as the condition of there being any experienceable reality at all. And what this looks like is a negation of oneself qua known self to make room for the other. I mean, Kabbalah, it's not. I mean, it's. I think there's a rhyme in there. You know, I would say it rhymes with Tzimtzum, or it is Tzimtzum, or even if you like the Tao Te Ching, the Tao emptied itself so that there could be the 10,000 things. It means like among the 10,000 things, you will not find the thing that is the Tao, but it's self-emptying was the precondition. That one cannot find the Tao in this way is what's required for there to be like an experienceable reality of distinctions in light and dark. And so I'm saying that if the ultimacy of God is not such that everything that is in God is God, it doesn't look like he's as ultimate as all that. And that seems like a problem. He said, if you absolutize anything, it will destroy you. And that seems to imply that there's a thing doing the destroying that is truly absolute. Because it's still there to destroy you after all the other non-absolute things have gone and destroyed themselves. And the question is,
Yeah.
what is that thing? And
Yeah.
you know, it's if we're leaning, I mean, seems to me a danger in leaning too much on the distinction or the transcendence, and to say that God is forever not. And because to say that something is not, you know, is implying that beneath the thing that is what it is and the thing that is not that thing, there's something deeper. The essence of reality is unity. And that if God can be other than me, it just makes me wonder, what is the deeper God in whom both God and I live and move and have our being, or who makes the
Jacob,
distinction between me and God intelligible? And so, in other words, if God is only there in the mode of distinction, there seems to be a problem. He doesn't seem to be the ultimate reality anymore. There's just a way that if one tries the logic on many different paths, they all go to one place, and so far it does not. I mean, and it looks like forgiveness to me, because forgiveness is when you experience. I am the rule such that when I experience the consequences of all my actions from the viewpoint of all those they affected, when I am every man, and I judge myself, the actor, from the viewpoint of all those whom my actions affected, you know, only forgiveness survives unscathed, and it is an identification of oneself with that infinite God who is in everyone and everything, and who indeed is everyone and everything. And also, like Maximus Confessor said, beyond everyone and everything. But again, when we're presupposing the distinction, it's also just when we're getting to the question of distinction or beyond, it's merely presupposing a deeper unity in light of which a distinction is intelligible. So anyway, I know that's not good enough, and we're increasingly out of time, but that's what I would say.
So since you mentioned the Kabbalah, I'm going to use my prerogative as the host here and read this, which is one of my favorite sections.
You should hear me haltingly read Hebrew, because it's something I can do nowadays, but on a future time, at a future time.
Yes. The prophet Elijah of blessed memory opened and said, "Eternal hidden master of the worlds, you are he whose unity is infinite and absolute, and therefore indivisible. You are he transcendent beyond all that is above and concealed behind all that is concealed. No thought whatsoever can grasp you, but you are he who brought forth 10 rectifications. We call them the 10 Sefirot Atzilut, with which to regulate hidden worlds that are not revealed, as well as worlds that are revealed. Indeed, it is through these that you are hidden from human beings. You are he who binds them and unifies them, and inasmuch as you are within them, anyone who separates one from the other is regarded as having caused a separation in you. You also arranged garments. It is from these garments that the souls of human beings originate. They are called a body relative to the clothes that cover over them. These are arranged as follows. Loving kindness is the right arm, restraint is the left arm, and harmony is the torso. Dominance and empathy are the 2 legs, and foundation is the body's extremity, the sign of the Holy Covenant. Kingship is the mouth. It is therefore called the oral Torah. Wisdom is the brain, the seat of thought, and understanding is the heart's ability to discern. Concerning these, it is written, the hidden things belong to God our God. The supernal crown is the Keter of Malchut, concerning which it is said, I declare the end from the beginning, the leather box of the Tefillin. Within the holy name, the way of Atzilut, this name therefore fills and saturates its limbs and branches as water irrigates and saturates a tree. It then grows in proportion to how much water flows through it. Eternal hidden master of the world, you are the supreme cause of all causes and the origin of all effects. You water the tree with that flow, and that flow is the very life force of the tree, like a soul to a body. But no human likeness or bodily image exists in your infinite essence, with which we might liken you to anything within or without. You alone created the starry galaxies and the earth. From the galaxies above, you brought forth sun and moon, planets and starry constellations. On the earth below, you brought forth trees and plants in the Garden of Eden and grass, living creatures, birds and fish, animals and humanity. Through them, you make known that which is above, how all that is above and below is regulated, and how the higher worlds may be known from the lower. But the knowledge of your essence is completely impossible. And besides you, there is no unity between the upper and the lower, and you are known as the master of everything, and all the Sephirot, everyone, has a specific name, and through them you are called king. And you do not have a specific name because you fill all their names, and you are complete over all, and should you separate from them, the names would remain like a body without a soul.
There's a lot of stuff I would want to say in response to that. That's it's profound in a way where, you know, like there's multiple perspectives that I see triangulating on the one thing that I myself, in my illiterate way, I'm always still trying to talk about: Kabbalah and Vedanta and Neoplatonism.
We'll talk more about this later, but the
right.
this stream is starting. So
all right.